No worries. Senator Waters.
I've got some questions about the national assessment of chemicals in coal seam gas.
Thank you,
If that's
Senator.
yourself?
That's me
great.
again.
Thank you. Dr. Richards, nice to have you here. Last time we spoke, and I don't think I spoke with you last time. So
I think you did.
Oh, gosh, well, your memory's better than mine. My apologies. We talked about the progress of that national assessment, and I understand it was originally due in 2014, but was then that was pushed back to, I think, mid-2015. It's now basically mid-2015. Do we have an update on when that will be completed?
Senator, the NICNAS website still optimistically says mid-2015. As I've advised this committee on previous occasions, the national assessment of chemicals associated with coal seam gas is work that is NICNAS is part of, on contract, on commission from the Environment Department, from the Office of Water Science. NICNAS has, during the course of this project, as have the other partners in the project, CSIRO and the Chemical Assessment Section within the Environment Department, with advice from Geoscience Australia, have been providing progress reports to the Environment Department, and the Environment Department has been subjecting those to its internal consultation and clearance processes, and we continue to get feedback on those reports and from technical editors and the like. And so we're still in this iterative process of reviewing and revising the reports. Can I confidently give you a date on which those reports will be released, Senator? That is a matter, for when they're actually finished that somewhat iterative process of review and editing, and secondly, it's a matter for the Environment Minister and his department as to the release of those reports.
So thanks for clarifying that it's reached that review and editing process. So can I just confirm that NICNAS's input in relation to the actual amassing of the content has finished?
NICNAS has submitted what we considered final draft reports.
You've done your bit, now you're waiting on them.
But we continue to get questions and suggested edits, and so from our point of view, we're continuing to finesse the documents, taking into account feedback from a range of sources, largely mediated through the Environment Department.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll take that up with them at the next opportunity. And thank you for explaining the reason for the delays. Is that a sort of standard delay, or did you get the sense that it was taking a particularly long time for that review process?
I don't think I have an opinion on that.
You don't have, okay. I don't
Senator.
know about these things, but that's all very mysterious. Can I just confirm, last time we talked about the scope of that assessment, and you confirmed that it was to do with surface water and shallow groundwater, but my recollection was that it was not looking at the impacts on deep aquifers.
That's right. So I answered a series of questions, Senator, which I saw you put on your YouTube channel.
I'm famous now.
I'm famous now. The scope of the project was set a number of years ago by the Office of Water Science on advice from the Independent Expert Scientific Committee on Coal Seam Gas and Large Coal Mining Developments, based on contemporary concerns at that time. We are all aware that, that's not all the concerns, but that was, as with any project, scope creep is probably the hardest thing to manage, and so it's not a refusal to recognise there are other issues that might need looking at. This was the agreed scope of this particular project for this particular amount of funding that was provided, and it's a matter for the Environment Department as to whether they commission further work.
Okay. Has there been any suggestion or indication from either the Office of Water Science within the department or from the Independent Expert Scientific Committee that they are aware that, as you say, the concerns are no longer just about shallow aquifers and surface water, if they were ever only about that? Is there any moves to expand out the scope of that assessment to now look at deep aquifers?
So, Senator, certainly I would not be surprised if the Office of Water Science and the IESC were aware of those concerns. Whether to the extent to which they're contemplating that is not a matter for me to comment on.
So you've not yet been asked to expand the scope of that assessment?
We've not been commissioned to do any further work at this point, Senator.
Okay.
That doesn't preclude them asking us
Yes, well,
tomorrow.
we live in hope, thank you. And recalling again that national assessment just looks at coal seam gas and doesn't look at shale gas
That's
or
right.
tight gas for that matter. Is there any expertise within NICNAS to establish whether the threats from the fracking chemicals used in shale and tight gas are comparable to the threats posed by the essentially similar or the same chemicals used for coal seam gas?
NICNAS's expertise is in assessing the risks of chemicals, and as you would be aware, Senator, the way you do a risk assessment is to first look at the intrinsic hazards of the chemical, which are the properties of the chemical itself, and then look at exposure and the way in which people or the environment is exposed to the chemical. One of the challenges and one of the outcomes activities within the current project has been that prior to this project there were no reliable methods for measuring exposure from that use, and so that's been that will be, I think, a significant outcome of this project. The reason there were a number of partners to this project, including the CSIRO, was to develop those models, those exposure models, and those, I would expect that those models may well be able to be adapted for other related mining activities, but that's a technical question for those.
Sure. Again, we live in hope. Can you just tell me a little bit more about what those exposure models, what questions they help you answer?
So the exposure models are looking at to the degree to which workers, the general public and the environment are exposed to the chemicals that are used in hydraulic fracturing and drilling for coal seam gas.
Okay. And that, you say, is something that we haven't yet had a model for, despite the fact that there's been multiple approvals for coal seam gas across the country.
The models have been developed as part of this project, and obviously we've been providing ongoing reports to the Environment Department.
Are you aware whether they've used any of the models in their assessment processes under the
That's not a matter
UPBC
on
Act?
which I can comment. I'm not aware of that.
We could probably work that out from the time frame. When did you provide them a usable model?
NICNAS doesn't provide those exposure models. That's a CSIRO input, and so I'm
Okay.
not in a
Are
position
you
to
aware
comment
of
on that.
when CSIRO provided the model to the department?
I don't have the date with me, Senator.
Do you have a rough
I think that
estimate?
might be a question best put to the Office of Water Science.
Okay, thank you. Anyway, my point remains, it's great that this work is now being done. What a shame that it's come after most of the key approvals have already been issued, but that's obviously a matter for the Minister and not a matter for NICNAS. I've asked you this before, and forgive me for asking again because I've forgotten what you said. With that exposure model, you're talking about fracking chemicals. Have you looked at the impacts on, you said, workers, the general public or the environment from the mobilising of naturally occurring BTECs from the fracking process itself?
As part of the broader project, CSIRO has done some work on identifying chemicals that might be mobilised, the so-called geogenic chemicals. But as you know, NICNAS' role is the risk assessment of industrial chemicals, which are chemicals
so that's beyond
introduced.
Your purview.
So it's not.
Okay,
we haven't done a risk assessment of those chemicals, but the identification of those chemicals is part of the project. Now, if asked, we may be able to do an assessment of those risks, but that's not part of the current scope of the current project.
So it's something that might fall within your scope of responsibility, but it hasn't yet been given to you to
It
work
wouldn't
on.
fall within the scope of our statutory responsibility, but it might fall within the scope of our expertise.
Okay, interesting. Well, I'll ask you next time whether anyone's asked you to factor those risks in. Can I just check in
But there would be other people who could equally provide that advice. So
yeah, thank you.
I wouldn't say that we have a monopoly and we have an automatic right to be contracted on this matter.
Sure. I understand that in the 2014 budget, there was an announcement that the Office of Water Sciences research program would be abolished come 30 June of next year, with a saving of $10 million over 5 years, and of course an avoidance of the amassing of all sorts of useful knowledge. Are you aware whether there's been any work that NICNAS might have had the chance to participate in should that funding stream have continued?
NICNAS has had no guaranteed funding. We've undertaking the current project on the basis of being commissioned for this project, we have no right or expectation to be contracted for any other work. That's a question for the Office of Water Science.
Right.
Senator.
So there were never any discussions about potential work that office research program could have funded that it obviously now can't because it's going to be abolished.
As I answered in a previous question, all the officers working in the are departmental employees of the Department of Health who, as you would expect, have conversations with other public servants across government on a range of issues, but there've been no contract negotiations.
Okay. What was the sort of subject matter of the potential scope of that work?
There's been no specific scope mentioned, Senator. It's more, when you agree on a scope, you agree on what you're not currently doing. Whether that might form the basis of a further work is a separate contractual discussion.
Okay. And can I just check that the funding for the national assessment, does that come from that stream that's now been abolished into the future?
Exactly. I know it comes from the Office of Water Science. Senator, whether it comes from that particular funding source, I have no idea. That's again a question for the Office of Water Science.
Okay. Thanks very much for your time.
Thank you.